The Velhari Empire did not ask for help. They requisitioned it. There is a difference, and every diplomat in the Nine-Sector Coalition understood that difference the way you understand a bruise, not by looking at it but by pressing on it and watching someone flinch. The requisition came through official channels, stamped with the Velhari seal of absolute necessity, a mark so rare that most junior diplomats had only ever seen it printed in history textbooks between chapters about extinction-level crises and the fall of the Rennick Confederation. The seal meant, "We have exhausted every option available to a civilization that has existed for 11,000 years. We are now reluctantly looking outward." They were looking at Earth. Specifically, they were looking at a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 43 years ago. A species that, by Velhari academic standards, was still in what xenosociologists politely called the volatile developmental corridor, which was a very clean, very professional way of saying, these creatures have not yet stopped finding reasons to kill each other. Ambassador Sealvareth of the Velhari Empire stood at the receiving dock of Station Miravel 9 and watched the human transport vessel finish its docking sequence. She was a tall being, nearly 8 feet, with skin the pale color of river clay and 4 eyes arranged in a vertical line down the center of her face, each one capable of independent focus. She had spent 30 years in diplomatic service. She had negotiated treaties with species that communicated through bioluminescent skin patterns, species that experienced time in nonlinear loops, and species that did not have individual identity in any way she could initially understand. She had never been nervous before a docking. She was nervous now. Not because of what humans were rumored to be. Because of this, the Earth Coalition had chosen to send humans. She had read the file 3 times. The first time she thought the translation was corrupted. The second time she assumed it was some form of human humor she lacked the cultural context to decode. The third time she set the file down on her desk and stood at her observation window for a very long time, watching the stars, wondering if the Velhari High Council had genuinely understood what they were asking for when they sent that requisition to Earth. The file was not about generals. It was not about strategists, decorated officers, or brilliant military minds with rows of medals and distinguished service records, nor the kind of measured, calculating intelligence that Velhari command structures were built to interface with. The Earth Coalition had sent Unit 7. Unit 7 was not a division. It was not a battalion. It was not even, technically, a formal military designation under standard Earth Coalition organizational charts. It was a classification. A holding category. A bureaucratic drawer that Earth's military had quietly created sometime in the previous decade for soldiers who were, and this was the precise language used in the official documentation, language that Sealvareth had read and reread until the words felt strange in her mind, operationally exceptional but institutionally unclassifiable. In the attached behavioral assessments, human psychologists had used phrases like threshold divergent, consequence dissonant, and motivationally atypical. In the margin of one page, some human analyst had written, in small handwritten letters that the file scanner had faithfully captured, "They work. We don't know why. Stop asking." The transport finished docking. The airlock hissed. Sealvareth straightened her diplomatic sash, clasped her 4 hands in the Velhari gesture of formal welcome, and prepared herself. The first human through the door was a woman named Carla Voss. Carla Voss was 38 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and had the particular quality of stillness that Sealvareth had previously only observed in deep-ocean predators in documentary footage, the kind of stillness that was not rest. The kind that was patient with a purpose. She wore a standard Earth Coalition field uniform that looked like it had been through conditions the uniform's manufacturer had not anticipated. Her hair was pulled back tight. She had a small scar beneath her left eye that curved upward, giving her a permanent expression that read, across species lines with zero translation difficulty, "I have already thought of 6 ways this could go wrong, and I find that interesting rather than troubling." She looked at Sealvareth. She smiled. Sealvareth's secondary and tertiary eyes, the ones that handled threat assessment, both focused independently and simultaneously. "Ambassador," Carla Voss said. Her voice was pleasant. "Nice station. Love what you've done with the docking lights. Very welcoming." Behind her came the rest of Unit 7. Marcus Dale, who was 6 feet 2 and built like a structural support beam, was reading something on a small handheld device with the focused calm of a man on a commuter train. June Park, who entered the docking bay, looked at the ceiling, looked at the floor, looked at the walls, and then said quietly to no one in particular, "The acoustic resonance in here will be a problem if anything loud happens." Dorian Cass, who walked in eating something, noticed Sealvareth's 4 eyes, pointed at his own 2 eyes with 2 fingers in what he apparently meant as a friendly gesture, and said, Cool setup. Do they all focus at the same time, or is it a rotation thing? And finally, Yael Brennan, who was the last through the door, who had said nothing yet, who had simply looked around the docking bay with the slow, thorough attention of someone cataloging everything in the room for a reason that was not immediately clear, and who was, according to her file, the one the Earth Coalition Psychological Review Board had spent the most time on and said the least about. Sealvereth looked at the 5 of them. The 5 of them looked back at her, or around her, or at the ceiling, or at their devices, or at the docking bay architecture, which was apparently acoustically concerning. "Welcome," Sealvereth said carefully, "to Velhari-controlled space. On behalf of the Empire, I extend formal greeting and—" "What's the threat?" Carla Voss asked. "Not rudely. Just directly. The way you ask someone what time it is." Sealvereth paused. "We have protocols for the formal introduction of Ambassador." Carla's voice was still pleasant. Still calm. "We've been traveling for 19 days. We read the brief. We have questions the brief didn't answer. We'd like to get started." Behind her, Marcus Dale had not looked up from his device. June Park was still thinking about the acoustics. Dorian Cass had finished whatever he had been eating and was now looking at the docking bay doors with the specific kind of attention that made Sealvereth's threat assessment eyes do something uncomfortable. And Yael Brennan was looking at Sealvereth. Just looking. With the kind of attention that felt less like observation and more like measurement. Sealvereth made a decision in that moment, a diplomatic decision, the kind she was trained for, which was that the Velhari Empire had 11,000 years of history, a military force spanning 9 sectors, and a crisis so severe it had required the seal of absolute necessity. And they had called Earth. And Earth had sent these people. Which meant either the Earth Coalition had catastrophically misunderstood the assignment, or they understood it better than she did. She unclasped her 4 hands from the welcome gesture. "Follow me," she said. "I'll show you everything. There are things empires do not admit. Not because they are hiding them, though sometimes they are, but because certain truths, when spoken out loud inside the architecture of power, have a way of becoming structural damage." The Velhari had a word for it, Vethsori. Roughly translated, it meant the crack that appears when you name the weight. Their philosophers had written extensively about it. Their politicians had built entire careers around avoiding it. The briefing room on Station Miravel 9 was designed to prevent Vethsori. Everything in it communicated stability, permanence, and control. The walls were a deep resonant blue, a color the Velhari associated with unbroken continuity. The table was carved from a single piece of tessarite stone, a material found only on the Velhari homeworld, quarried from formations that were older than most spacefaring civilizations. The ceiling displayed a slow, rotating map of Velhari-held space, 22 systems, 17 inhabited worlds, and 900 years of unbroken territorial sovereignty. Carla Voss sat down at the tessarite table, looked at the ceiling map for approximately 3 seconds and said, "How long has the Kethvar been operating inside your borders?" The 4 Velhari officials in the room went very still. Sealvereth, who had been preparing to begin the formal briefing at the formal beginning, said, "The brief we transmitted to the Earth Coalition did not contain that designation." "No," Carla agreed. "It didn't." Pause. "Then how?" "The brief told us what was happening," Carla said. "I received the Kethvar designation from a conversation with a Velhari cargo worker at the refueling station on Merath 2 during transport. She used the word twice and then fell very quiet, as people do when they have said something they did not mean to say in front of those they are unsure about. She looked at the officials. She seemed like she was scared. Not of me. Of the word itself." The Velhari officials exchanged a look that required no translation. Dorian Cass, who was sitting sideways in his chair with one leg over the armrest in a way that was definitely not standard diplomatic posture, said, "So what is it?" "The Kethvar. What are we actually dealing with?" The senior official, a broad-shouldered Velhari named Commander Orith Den, who wore the military's deep bronze insignia and had the posture of a being who had never once in his entire career sat sideways in a chair, said, "The Kethvar are a destabilization entity." "That's a category," Marcus Dale said without looking up from his device. "Not a description." Orith Den looked at him. "Excuse me?" Marcus looked up for the first time. He had a very even face. Not unfriendly. Just level. This level comes not from blankness but from having seen many things and organized them into a working system. Destabilization entity is how you classify something. It doesn't tell me what it does. Does it hack infrastructure? Does it run insurgencies? Does it use psychological operations, economic pressure, or physical sabotage? What is the actual mechanism? A long silence. Orith then said, "All of those. In sequence. Tailored to the target." "Tailored how?" June Park asked. She had been quiet until now, sitting with her hands folded on the table, her eyes moving slowly around the room. "The room is not a space. The room is a system. Walls. Vents. Door frames. The way sound would move." Orith then said that the sound was tailored to the specific psychological and cultural vulnerabilities of the civilization being destabilized, and the effort it cost him to say that sentence was visible in the way his jaw tightened on every third word. This was Velhari in real time. He was naming the weight. He knew the crack was appearing. The Kethvar study a civilization for years before they begin. They find the exact places where a culture's main beliefs can break down from pressure, even if no outside force is clearly seen. Silence in the briefing room. "Ha," said Dorian. "How long have they been studying you?" Yael Brennan asked. It was the first thing she had said since entering the station. Her voice was quiet and had no particular texture to it, not cold, not warm, just present. She was looking at Orith Den with the same measuring quality. Sealvareth had noticed in the docking bay, and Sealvareth watched Orith Den, a decorated military commander, a being who had not been visibly unnerved by anything in recent memory, take a half-second longer than normal to respond. "We believe," he said carefully, "between 40 and 60 years. "And when did you notice?" Yael asked. Another pause. 7 years ago. "So they had 40 to 50 years of study before you saw them," Yael said. Not as an accusation. As a confirmation. As if she were writing it down in her head. "And in those 7 years since you noticed, what's changed?" "The pace," Orith Den said. "Once they knew we had identified them, they accelerated. What had been subtle became..." He paused. "Became like this." He pressed a control button on the table. The ceiling map shifted. The 22 systems were still there, but now overlaid with something else. A slow spread of red, not solid, more like a bruise, spreading outward from 7 distinct points inside Velhari space. Not territory. Not occupation. Something that looked like pressure. 4 colony worlds have experienced cascading institutional failure in the past 3 years, Orith Den said. Not from military attack. From within. Governance structures, food distribution systems, and community trust networks are all deteriorating simultaneously in patterns that our analysts can see but cannot interrupt because by the time the pattern is visible, the mechanism is already embedded. Like a tumor that's been growing for 20 years and you only found it when it started showing symptoms, Marcus said. Yes. Orith Den said it as if the word cost something. And your military? Carla asked. Is built, Orith Verith said, to respond to visible forces. Fleets, armies, defined territorial aggression. We have, in 900 years of sovereignty, never faced an enemy that had no face. No fleet. No territory. Only method. The room was quiet. Carla Voss looked at her team. Something passed between them, not words, not gestures, just a quality of shared understanding that Sealvareth found difficult to categorize, the way she had found the Unit 7 files difficult to categorize, the way she was finding this entire encounter difficult to categorize. Okay, Carla said. She turned back to Orith Den. We need full access to all 7 pressure points. We need unredacted personnel files for every institution that's failed. We need to talk to regular people on those 4 colony worlds, not officials or analysts. And we need the Kethvar's full operational profile, including anything your intelligence services were too uncomfortable to include in the official brief. Orith Den stiffened. Some of that information is classified at the highest. Commander. Carla's voice didn't change. Didn't harden. Didn't soften. It stayed exactly the same, pleasant, direct, and utterly unhurried. You put the seal of absolute necessity on the requisition you sent to Earth. That seal means you've tried everything else. Which means you've decided that the risk of telling us everything is lower than the risk of not telling us everything. She tilted her head slightly. We're not here to judge what you did or didn't catch in time. We're here because you need people who understand a specific kind of problem. She paused. So let us understand it. The 4 Velhari officials looked at each other. Sealvareth thought about the file. The margin note. They work. We don't know why. Stop asking. She thought about Carla Voss in the docking bay, that stillness, that patience with a purpose, and she thought about how she had initially categorized it as predatory, and how she was no longer sure that was the right word. Not because it was wrong. Because it wasn't complete. Give them everything, she said quietly. Orith Den looked at her. Give them everything, she said again. All of it. Whatever we haven't said out loud. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he pressed another control on the table, and the ceiling map expanded, and the real briefing began. Marcus Dale worked the way water moves through a cracked wall, not forcefully, not dramatically, just with the absolute certainty of finding every gap. He had been given access to 40 years of Velhari institutional records, governance structures, supply chain architecture, community cohesion indices, cultural calendar data, dispute resolution patterns, and he had been given a room, a workstation, and after some negotiation, a chair that was technically designed for a Velhari body but which he had modified with a folded emergency thermal blanket in a way that offended the station's facilities manager profoundly and which Marcus had not acknowledged even slightly. He did not take breaks as the Velhari staff who were assigned to assist him expected. He ate at the workstation. He slept in 2-hour windows, woke up, looked at whatever he had last been looking at as if no time had passed, and continued. The Velhari assistant assigned to him, a young analyst named Reith, who had been briefed to observe the human and report anything unusual, had initially filed hourly reports. After 16 hours, the reports had become shorter. After 24 hours, Reith had sent a single message to his supervisor that read, "He has not said anything alarming. He has also not said anything I can explain. Please advise." No advice came. Reith stayed. On the morning of the second day, Marcus looked up from the records and said, without preamble, "The Kethvar didn't target your institutions." Reith looked up from his station. "I'm sorry?" "The failures, the governance collapse, the food distribution breakdown, the community trust erosion, your analysts have been treating those as the targets. Like the Kethvar, it identified which institutions mattered and then attacked them." He turned the workstation display to face Reith. "But look at the sequence." Reith looked. The display showed a timeline of failures across all 4 colony worlds, each event color-coded by institutional category, arranged chronologically. "The governance failures always come third," Marcus said. "Distribution breakdowns come second. But the trust erosion is always first, and it's always small. A corruption scandal that seems isolated, a community leader who turns out to have been deceiving their neighbors about something personal, a local tradition that gets publicly exposed as having different origins than the community believed." He pointed. "Small things. Private things. Things that shouldn't be able to collapse an entire system." "But they do," Reith said slowly, looking at the pattern. "They do," Marcus agreed. "Because the Kethvar aren't attacking your institutions. They're attacking the thing your institutions are built on. They're attacking the premise, the shared belief that the people around you are roughly who they claim to be. That the story your community tells about itself is roughly true." He sat back. "Once that's gone, it doesn't matter how well designed your food distribution system is. People stop using it correctly because they don't trust the people running it. It doesn't matter how sound your governance structure is. People stop participating because they believe the structure is a performance hiding a reality they can't see." Reith was quiet for a long moment. "If that's the mechanism," he said carefully, "then there is no institutional fix. There's no system you can repair or replace because the problem isn't the system." "Right," Marcus said. "Then what?" "I don't know yet," Marcus said. He turned back to the display. "That's what I'm working on." Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, in the section that housed the communications array, June Park was doing something that the station's chief communications engineer, a meticulous Velhari named Sanavel, found increasingly difficult to observe without physical discomfort. June was taking apart a Velhari long-range communications relay. Not to fix it. Not because it was broken. Simply because she had looked at it for 20 minutes and then said quietly, "Can I open this?" And Sanavel, who was used to the question meaning something like, "May I examine the exterior paneling?" had said yes, and June had produced a set of tools from her field kit and begun. "You're not, that's not, what are you?" Sanavel had started 3 sentences without finishing any. "I'm listening to it," June said. "You cannot listen to a..." "Every system makes sound," June said. She had the casing off now and was holding a small device near the internal components, not touching them, just near them. "Not always sound you can hear. But vibration. Frequency. The way components interact creates a profile that's specific to that system in that condition. Like a voice." She paused, tilting the device slightly. "Your relay network has a voice. I want to know if it's changed recently." Sanavel stared at her. "You think the Kethvar have altered our communications infrastructure?" "I think they might have added something to it," June said. "Not removed or broken, that would be too visible." "Added?" Something that doesn't interfere with function but changes what the system transmits alongside the official signal. She looked up at Sanavel. Something emotional. Subperceptual. Something that makes people who use your communications network feel, just slightly, just at the edges of awareness, that they can't quite trust what they're hearing. A long silence. That would require, Sanavel stopped. Restarted. The engineering complexity of that would be extraordinary, June agreed. Which is why no one looked for it. She went back to listening. Dorian Cass was in the station's administrative district, talking to people. This task was, on the surface, the most straightforward of the Unit 7 assignments, and it was also, for reasons that the Velhari liaison assigned to accompany him, a flustered mid-level diplomat named Oren, was finding difficult to articulate even to himself, the most unsettling to watch. Dorian talked to everyone. The cleaning staff. The cafeteria workers. The junior analysts who ate lunch at the same table every day and had stopped really looking at each other sometime in the past 2 years without noticing when, exactly, that had started. A security officer who had put in 3 transfer requests in the past 8 months and didn't know why, since she had no specific complaint. A facilities manager who had been working on the same station for 11 years and who, when Dorian sat down with him for 20 minutes and asked him what the place felt like now compared to 5 years ago, had answered the question and then gone very still and said, "I hadn't thought about it in those terms," in a voice that suggested he was now going to be thinking about it in exactly those terms for a long time. Dorian was not a therapist. He did not present himself as one. He presented himself as someone who was curious about people, which was both a strategy and completely true. He had a quality that made humans and, apparently, Velhari feel simultaneously seen and safe, which was a rare combination because usually being seen did not feel safe at all. "You're mapping the social damage," Oren said on the 3rd hour of their circuit through the station's common areas. "I'm talking to people," Dorian said. "But you're?" "I'm talking to people," Dorian said again, not correcting Oren, just restating, and Oren got the distinct impression that there was a difference between those two things that he did not yet have the vocabulary to describe. And Yael Brennan was somewhere else entirely. Carla had told the Velhari commanders that Yael was reviewing classified intelligence files in a secured room. This was true. What she had not mentioned was that Yael had finished reviewing the classified intelligence files in 4 hours, had then asked to be left alone with the room and its workstation, and had spent the following 6 hours doing something that the station's monitoring systems recorded as stationary, no observable activity. Which was not accurate. What Yael was doing, what Yael was always doing, in rooms and in fields and in places where the situation had not yet resolved into visible shape, was thinking. Not strategizing. Not planning. Those were things that happened after thinking, and most people confused them for thinking because they produced results that were easier to point at. Yael thought about the way some people breathed, continuously, without drama, as a necessary condition of being alive. She thought about the Kethvar intelligence files, which were extensive and deeply incomplete in ways that were more informative than the things they contained. She thought about the pattern Marcus had identified, the trust erosion preceding everything else. She thought about what kind of entity chooses that approach. Not the tactical reasons for it. The philosophical reasons. What does a civilization believe about other civilizations if its primary tool is the systematic destruction of self-belief? She thought about that for a very long time. And then she thought about something else, something that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy or mission objectives, which was that the Velhari, for all their 11,000 years and their tesserite tables and their deep blue walls designed to communicate unbroken permanence, were afraid. Not of defeat. Empires knew defeat. They had histories full of it, carefully organized into lessons. They were afraid of dissolution. Of becoming something unrecognizable. It was a civilization that looked back at what it had been but could not find the thread connecting then to now. That fear, Yael thought, was not a weakness the Kethvar had created. It was a wound the Kethvar had found. Those were different things. And that difference, she was beginning to believe, was the whole problem, and possibly, though she was not yet sure, the whole solution. While her team worked, Carla Voss was doing what Carla Voss was always doing in the early stages of a situation, which was watching. Not gathering intelligence. Not forming plans. Watching. The way you watch a fire before you decide whether it needs to be contained, redirected, or simply understood. She sat in the station's observation deck, a curved transparent surface overlooking a star field that was, objectively, beautiful, in the way that deep space always was, in the way that things that existed entirely without reference to human concerns tended to be, and she thought about the file the Earth Coalition had sent with Unit 7. Not the Unit 7 personnel files. The mission file. The one that explained why Earth had sent these 5 people in response to the Velhari seal of absolute necessity. The mission file was 3 pages long. That was not a short document, but it was a short document for an empire-scale crisis, and the length was deliberate. The Earth Coalition had learned, through decades of difficult experience, that over-instructing Unit 7 was counterproductive in the way that over-explaining a joke is counterproductive. It doesn't improve the thing work, it makes it stop working entirely. The 3 pages said, essentially, the Velhari have a problem we cannot solve through conventional means. Unit 7 may be able to solve it through unconventional means. Provide them everything they need. Do define what everything they need means. Do not define what unconventional means. Trust the process. There is no further instruction. Carla had read those 3 pages and had understood something that the Earth Coalition diplomats who wrote them probably hadn't fully articulated to themselves, which was that this mission was not about saving the Velhari Empire. It was about something much more difficult. It was about making the Velhari Empire remember what it had been before it became afraid. This was not, Carla reflected, the kind of insight that fit neatly into a mission brief. It was also, as she became increasingly certain, the only insight that mattered. Behind her, the observation deck door opened and Sealvareth walked in. The ambassador stood for a moment, her 4 eyes adjusting to the starfield's light, and then she crossed to where Carla sat and stood beside her. "Your colleagues are unsettling my staff," Sealvareth said. "I know. The communications engineer, Sanavel, has not spoken to anyone in 6 hours. She appears to be processing something." "June does that to people," Carla said. "She shows them something about the systems around them that they can't unsee. It's uncomfortable. It's also useful." Pause. "The young analyst, Reith, who was assigned to observe your Dr. Dale, he filed a report this morning that said, and I quote, 'I no longer know what I expected, but it was not this, and I think I need to reconsider several things.'" "That's Marcus," Carla said. "He makes people look at their assumptions. Feels like being turned upside down. They're usually better for it later." Another pause. "Longer. And the one called Yao," Sealvareth said. "My security monitoring shows she has been in the same position in that secured room for 6 hours. Is she well?" Carla smiled. It was a real smile, not the pleasant, calibrated expression she wore in operational situations, but something smaller and more private. "Yael's fine. She's just thinking." "For 6 hours. Yael once spent 4 days thinking about a problem," Carla said. "The solution she came up with ended a conflict that had been running for 9 years in under 3 weeks. She paused. "Without anyone firing a single shot." Sealvareth was quiet. "Ambassador," Carla said, her voice shifting slightly, losing none of its pleasantness but gaining a layer underneath it, the way a river can look still on the surface and fast beneath. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand that I'm not asking it to judge you or the Empire. I'm asking it because the answer matters for what we do next." "Ask." "When the Kethvar started, the small corruptions, the personal betrayals, the exposure of community stories that turned out to be different from what people believed, when the Velhari first started experiencing that, before it became institutional collapse, before it became a crisis, was there a point where the Empire's response made it worse?" A very long silence. The star field turned slowly outside the observation deck. "Yes," Sealvareth said finally. Quietly. In the voice of someone putting down something they'd been carrying for a long time. "When we identified it as a destabilization campaign, we responded as we do to all threats. With containment. With information control. We told people that the corruptions were isolated, that the betrayals were individual failures, that the community narratives were fine, and that there was nothing systematic happening. We protected the story of who we were by refusing to acknowledge that the story was being attacked. And the people who were living through the corruptions and the betrayals," Carla said, "how did it feel to be told it was isolated and individual while they were experiencing something that felt systematic?" Silence. "It felt," Sealvareth said slowly, "like the Empire was one more thing that could not be trusted." "Yes," Carla said. "Outside stars. Inside, the particular kind of silence that follows the naming of a weight." Vethsorai, Sealvareth thought. The crack that appears when you name the weight. But then, and this was not something she had expected, she noticed that the crack she had expected to feel did not feel like structural damage. It felt like a window. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Carla looked at her. "Tell me about who the Velhari were," she said, "before they were afraid." On the 4th day Yael left the secured room. She went to the station's communication center, where Sanavel was still working. or rather had returned to working after 6 hours of processing something that June Park had shown her about her own communications infrastructure. She had not repaired the relay June had opened. She had rebuilt it, and in rebuilding it had found, exactly as June had predicted, a subperceptual frequency modifier embedded in the relay's secondary broadcast layer, so small and so elegantly placed that it had been there, Sanneval estimated, with the particular sick certainty of someone who is very good at her job realizing something terrible, for at least 12 years without anyone noticing. It did not disrupt communications. It accompanied them. It added to every signal that passed through the relay network, to every official broadcast, every personal message, every routine administrative transmission, a frequency that was not quite sound and not quite signal, that sat just below the threshold of conscious awareness, that created, in the bodies and minds of those who received it, a sensation that could best be described as doubt. Not in doubt about anything specific. Just doubt. A faint, sourceless, irresolvable uncertainty that accumulated over years and years of exposure, into a generalized inability to fully trust what you were seeing, hearing, and being told. June had found it in 3 hours. It had been operating for 12 years. Sanneval had not slept since. Yael found her at her workstation, cross-referencing the modifier's architecture against the station's complete historical maintenance logs, trying to determine the exact entry point. "Have you found where it came from?" Yael asked. "Not yet," Sanneval said. Her voice had the texture of someone who was running on determination instead of rest. "But I will." "I know," Yael said. "I need something from you though. The modifier, can you reverse it? Can you use the relay architecture to transmit the inverse frequency?" Sanneval stopped. Looked at Yael. "You want to broadcast the opposite of doubt." "I want to clean the signal," Yael said. "Whatever the modifier does, I want to undo it. Retroactively as much as possible and going forward completely." "That's technically possible," Sanneval said slowly, "but the reach?" "Every relay in the network that you can access from here," Yael said. "How many worlds does that cover?" Sanneval calculated. 14 of the 17 inhabited worlds. And the 4 colony worlds currently in crisis. "That'll do," Yael said. Sanneval looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in the communications engineer's expression, something that had nothing to do with technical assessment and everything to do with the particular quality of Yael's attention, which was, as Sealvareth had noted in the docking bay and Orith Den had noticed in the briefing room, not observation so much as measurement. Like being seen by something that saw accurately. "You know this won't fix the institutional damage," Sanneval said. "I know," Yael said. "The corruption, the broken trust, the failed systems. A clean signal doesn't repair those." "I know." "Then why?" "Because," Yael said, "people who have been breathing poisoned air for 12 years do not know they have been breathing poisoned air. They just know they feel a certain way and they've built their understanding of themselves and each other around that feeling. Before anything else can be repaired, before Marcus's work matters, before Dorian's work matters, before anything the Empire does matters, people need to be able to think clearly. Even briefly. Even just enough to start." Sanneval was quiet for a long time. "How long until you can do it?" Yael asked. "If I stop sleeping for days?" "Stop sleeping," Yael said. "And then, in a gentler register, I'll bring you food." That evening, or what counted as evening in a space station, which was mostly a matter of lighting adjustments and social agreement, Yael was in the secured room again when the workstation received an incoming signal. Not through official channels. This frequency should not have been able to reach the secured room. A frequency that the station's security systems had no record of ever having been used. The signal contained a message. The message was short. "You found the modifier. Faster than we expected." Yael looked at it for a long time. Then she typed, "Yes." Pause. Then. "We are curious about you. You are not what we expected Earth to send." Yael typed, "What did you expect?" "Soldiers. Weapons. An attempt to fight something that has no physical form." "That's what most empires try," Yael typed. "When they understand the method but not the philosophy behind it, they may struggle to apply it effectively." A longer pause. "You understand the philosophy?" It was not a question. Yael looked at the screen. Then she typed, carefully because every word in this exchange was also a piece of intelligence, and also because she meant what she was writing, both of which were true simultaneously in a way she had long since stopped finding strange. "I understand that you believe civilizations are fundamentally brittle. The stories they tell about themselves are load-bearing fictions, and if you find the right point to apply pressure, they collapse under their own weight. And I understand that your method works, has worked many times, because that belief is partially true. Another pause. Only partially? Civilizations are brittle, Yael typed. But brittleness and fragility aren't the same thing. Brittle things break cleanly. Fragile things shatter. What you're doing to the Velhari is treating them as fragile. You're trying to shatter them. But they're brittle, which means if someone helps them break cleanly they can be rebuilt. A very long pause. Then, why would you help them break cleanly? That still means breaking. Because as Yael typed, clean breaks heal. Shattering doesn't. The signal went quiet. Yael sat with it for a while in the way she sat with everything, not filling the silence, just letting it be what it was. Then, just as she was beginning to think the exchange was over, a final message appeared. You're not a soldier. No, Yael typed. Then what are you? She thought about that for a moment. About the files. This study focuses on threshold divergence, consequence dissonance, and motivational atypicality. About the margin note. The 19-day journey included Carla's smile on the observation deck, Marcus's water through a cracked wall focus, June's listening, Dorian's talking, and all the ways Unit 7 had been described, classified, and assessed, yet it had never been accurately named. She typed, I'm someone who pays attention. The signal cut. The room was quiet. Yael sat in it for a while longer. Then she went to find Sannivel and she brought food as promised. The problem with Dorian Cass, his genuine liking for people, made him both useful and, at times, a significant logistical challenge. Not in the performed, instrumental way of a skilled interrogator or a practiced charmer. Not with the warm distance of someone who had learned to use likability as a professional tool. Dorian Cass liked people the way some people like music, not because it was useful, not because it led anywhere, but because the experience of another person being fully themselves in front of you was, to him, intrinsically compelling. This had created, over the course of 4 days on Station Miravel 9, a situation that his liaison, Oren, had not anticipated and did not know how to report. Dorian had not confined himself to the social mapping that was his stated purpose. He had, through the natural momentum of being Dorian Cass, become embedded in the station's social fabric in a way that was difficult to describe as either infiltration or friendship but had qualities of both. He ate lunch with the cleaning staff on the second day and dinner with junior analysts on the third. He learned 17 Velhari names and the corresponding 18 social contexts in which using a name incorrectly carried different gradations of meaning. He attended a small informal gathering in one of the crew quarters, where several off-duty station workers played an instrument that made sound through synchronized breath and vibration, which Dorian listened to for 2 hours with the focused, present attention of someone who was experiencing something they had never encountered before and wanted to hold carefully. The station, which had felt to its residents like a place that was slowly draining of something unnamed, was beginning, incrementally without announcement, and without anyone quite sure when it had started, to feel slightly different. Not fixed. Not healed. Just less like a place where people had forgotten how to be easy with each other. Oren filed a report about it. The report said, I don't know what Dorian Cass is doing, but the cafeteria staff have started talking to each other again during shifts, and the security officer who submitted 3 transfer requests has not submitted a 4th. I don't know if the information is relevant. I'm uncertain whether there's a causal relationship. I don't know what I'm observing. Please let me know. No advice came. On day 4, Dorian sat down across from Oren himself. They were in the cafeteria. Dorian had 2 cups of something, a Velhari hot beverage that he had developed a genuine fondness for, which was not something he had expected and which had delighted him in proportion to how unexpected it was, and he put one in front of Oren without asking. Oren looked at it. I am your assigned liaison, he said. You are aware that my role includes monitoring and reporting on your activities. I know, Dorian said. How's that going? Pause. It's going, Oren said carefully, in ways I don't have the correct forms to describe. Dorian smiled. It is not the warm, distant smile of a practiced charmer. The actual one. Tell me something about this station that isn't in any report. Oren looked at him. That's an unusual request. I know. You're asking me to deviate from official? I'm asking you, Dorian said, what this place was like before. When you liked being here. Oren's 4 eyes focused and refocused in a pattern Dorian had come to recognize as the Velhari equivalent of a long, slow blink. Not evasion, but processing. The kind of pause before you say something you haven't said in a while because you'd stopped being sure it was safe to say. It was, Oren started. Stopped. Restarted. There was a period, 6 or 7 years ago, when the station felt like a place where important things were happening. Not just administratively. Genuinely. This station sat at the crossroads of 3 diplomatic corridors, and there were times when you could feel, could sense, that the decisions being made here had weight, that we were part of something that mattered. He paused. I don't know when that stopped. I know that it did stop. And I know that I stopped noticing that it had stopped, which is perhaps the most unsettling part. Dorian nodded slowly. He was not writing anything down. He never wrote anything down. It was all going somewhere inside him, organized in ways he couldn't have explained, but that had never once, in his experience, failed to be there when he needed it. The Kethvar didn't steal that feeling from you, Dorian said. They made you stop believing it was real. Oren looked at him. There's a difference, Dorian said. One is loss. One is, you still have the thing. You just stopped being able to see it. He tilted his cup slightly. The question isn't how to rebuild what was taken. The question is how to help people see what's still there. Oren was quiet for a long time. You are, he said finally, a very strange soldier. I'm not really a soldier, Dorian said. Then what are you? Dorian thought about it. I'm someone who finds people interesting, he said. I found that it helps. Commander Orithden, when woken at 3 a.m. station time by a human woman who was looking at him with the pleasant directness of someone about to tell him something that would require him to restructure several years of understanding, did not take the information about the potential inside person with the shock Marcus had predicted. He took it with the particular stillness of someone who has been walking around a thought for a long time without looking at it directly and has just been placed in front of it. You knew, Carla said. Not accusing. Confirming. Orithden stopped. The word he had been about to use was suspected, and saying it felt like naming a weight he wasn't sure the floor beneath him could hold. There have been moments, he said carefully, when the response team's analysis did not match what my field experience told me about the situation, where the recommended course of action seemed, not obviously wrong but, directed. It was as if the conclusion had been decided before the analysis was performed. And you didn't escalate that. I raised concerns, he said, with the stiffness of someone defending a position they know is partially indefensible. They were addressed through additional analysis that came to the same conclusions through slightly different reasoning. Which is exactly what would happen if the person producing the analysis was the inside person, Carla said. Pause. Yes, Orithden said. I need the internal communications, Carla said. All of them. I need access for Dr. Dale, unsupervised, within the next 30 minutes. And I need you to not tell anyone on the crisis response team that we're looking. Orithden looked at her. He was a decorated commander. He had spent 30 years building and maintaining the kind of institutional trust that allowed an empire's military infrastructure to function. He was being asked by a human woman he had met 5 days ago to take an action that would, if it went wrong, end his career and potentially destabilize the crisis response infrastructure at the moment the crisis was worst. He was also being asked because the Empire had put the seal of absolute necessity on the requisition. You will locate the source, he said. Not a question. We'll find the source, Carla confirmed. And then? Carla looked at him steadily. Then you'll deal with it. It's your empire. It should be your justice. Something shifted in Orithden's expression, something that Silverith, watching from the doorway where she had appeared at some point during the conversation, recognized as the precise emotional quality that the Velhari had no single word for but that old philosophical text described as the moment a weight becomes a foundation. I'll get you the access, Orithden said. On day 5, Marcus Dale looked up from his workstation at 3 a.m., station time, the corridors quiet, the lighting dim to its night cycle, Reith asleep in the chair next to him in the graceless, profound way of someone who had not meant to fall asleep but had run out of options, and said to no one, "Oh." Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, in the tone of someone who has been looking for something in a room for a long time and has finally realized it was never in the room. He looked at the display for another 10 minutes, confirming. Then he went to find Carla. She was awake. She was often awake at this hour, in the way that people whose minds run on something other than standard human circadian rhythms tend to be. Not insomnia, not anxiety, just a different relationship with night and the particular quality of thinking it enabled. She was in the observation deck. Marcus sat down next to her, looked at the star field for approximately 2 seconds out of courtesy, and said, "The Kethvar have an inside person." Carla looked at him. "In the Empire?" "In the Empire's crisis response infrastructure," Marcus said. "Specifically, this refers to the team assembled 7 years ago to analyze and respond to the Kethvar threat. The patterns I have been tracing, the reason every Velhari response to the Kethvar campaign has made things incrementally worse rather than better, are not due to incompetence. It's not bureaucratic dysfunction. It's guidance. Someone inside the crisis response team has been shaping the response to ensure it amplifies the damage rather than containing it. Silence. You're sure, Carla said. I've run the pattern 11 different ways, Marcus said. Every strategic decision that turned a manageable situation into a cascading failure has a common characteristic. It addressed the visible symptom and systematically ignored the mechanism. Every time. Without exception. Over 7 years. He paused. An institution can make the same analytical error twice. 3 times maybe. 7 years of consistent, systematic failure to correctly identify a mechanism. Ambassador, it took me 2 days to find it in the records. Took me 2 days. It is not invisible. It is not subtle. Something is preventing the people responsible for looking at it from doing so correctly. Carla was quiet for a long moment. Does anyone else know? She asked. Reith might, Marcus said. He's been sitting with me long enough that he's started seeing the patterns too. He hasn't said it out loud, but I've seen him look at the same data points 3 times in a row in a way that means he's about to connect something. And the inside person, do you have a name? Not yet, Marcus said. But I have a method. I know what the guidance looks like in the record trail. Which means I can work backward from the decisions to whoever was in the position to shape them. He paused. I need access to the crisis response team's internal communications. Not the official records, the actual communications. Messages. Meeting notes. The informal record. That's going to require going through Orith Den, Carla said. I know, Marcus said. Which is relevant, because Orith Den is on the crisis response team. Pause. He's not the inside person, Marcus said quickly. His decision signature is different. He makes the wrong calls, but in the way people make wrong calls when they're being given bad analysis. He's a victim of the guidance, not the source. He paused. But going to him for access means the inside person learns that we're looking. Which changes the timeline. Carla looked at the stars. How long do you need, she asked, if you had access right now? 2 days, Marcus said. Maybe less. And if the inside person knows we're looking? They'll do one of 2 things, Marcus said. Disappear into the noise or act before we can identify them. What does acting look like in this context? Marcus considered. Probably not violence, he said. That's not the Kethvar method. More likely they'll initiate whatever the next phase of the campaign is before it's ready. Accelerate something that was supposed to be gradual. He paused. Could cause a crisis that's harder to walk back from. Carla nodded slowly. Okay, she said. She stood up. I'm going to wake up Orith Den, she said. And I'm going to tell him that we have reason to believe his crisis response team has been compromised, and I'm going to ask for the internal communications records, and I'm going to watch his face when I tell him that to get a clearer read on whether he already suspects the truth. And if the inside person finds out we're moving? Marcus asked. Then we'll need Yael to be ready, Carla said. Marcus looked at her. Is Yael ready? Yael, Carla said, with the particular quality of certainty that comes from knowing someone the way you can only know someone if you have been in genuinely terrible situations with them and watched how they moved through it, is always ready. The name was Counselor Vethsaran. She had been on the crisis response team since its formation 7 years ago. She was 63, a career analyst, deeply respected within Velhari intelligence circles, and the author of 3 foundational texts on strategic threat assessment that were taught in every Velhari military academy. She had silver-gray skin and a quiet manner and had, in 7 years of systematic misdirection, never once appeared to be anything other than entirely dedicated to the empire she had spent her career serving. Marcus found her in the records in 19 hours. Not through a smoking gun. Not through a single devastating document. Through the accumulation of small consistencies. The way her analytical framing always nudged group thinking toward treating symptoms, the way her dissents from correct trajectory minority opinions were always just persuasive enough to redirect without appearing obstructive, and the way her access logs showed a pattern of late-night document reviews that lined up with every major strategic shift in the Kethvar campaign's acceleration timeline. He brought it to Carla. Carla brought it to Orith Den. Orith Den sat with it for a long time, longer than the evidence required, the way you sit with something when the intellectual confirmation is complete but the emotional comprehension hasn't caught up. She was my mentor, he said finally. Carla said nothing. She was the one who recommended me for the crisis response team, he said. She told me, I remember she told me, that the Kethvar situation required the best analytical minds the Empire had, and that I was one of them. He paused. I believed her. She may have believed it too, Carla said. Belief and loyalty aren't mutually exclusive. People can be genuinely committed to an empire and also genuinely convinced that the empire should end. Orith Den looked at her. The Kethvar don't recruit through coercion, Marcus said from his station across the room. Their psychological operation profiles suggest ideological recruitment. People who believe the civilizations they're destabilizing are worth destabilizing. Who have a philosophy about it. He paused. She didn't betray you because she was bought or blackmailed. She did it because she believed something. What could she believe? Orith Den said, and his voice had a quality in it that was not anger, that was beyond anger into something harder and quieter, that would make this worth doing? That's the question you need to ask her, Carla said. He looked at Carla. Not us, Carla said. You. This has to be you. The confrontation happened in a small conference room, just Orith Den and Velhari, while Carla waited outside with Silverith and listened to the quality of the silence. There was no audio feed. Orith Den had been clear about that. Whatever happened in the room was between the Empire and itself. Unit 7 had found the source. The rest was Velhari business. It took 2 hours. When Orith Den came out, he looked different in a way that was difficult to quantify. Not older, exactly, not broken, but like a being who had walked through a room where the furniture had been rearranged and whose body had not yet adjusted to the new configuration. She believes, he said, and his voice was steady and terrible in the way of voices that are achieving steadiness through enormous effort, that the Velhari Empire has been, for 300 years, engaging in a slow cultural annexation of every civilization in its sphere of influence. That our expansion is not military conquest but something she called gravity colonialism, the use of economic and cultural weight to pull smaller civilizations into alignment with Velhari values until their own values become subordinate and eventually invisible. He paused. She believes the Kethvar are offering those civilizations the opportunity to reclaim what we have taken. Silence. And us? Silverith asked. The Empire itself? She believes, he said, that we need to experience what we have done to others before we can be trusted to stop doing it. The corridor was hushed. Carla looked at the floor for a moment. Then she looked at Silverith. Is she wrong? Carla asked. A very long silence. She is not entirely wrong, Silverith said in a voice like the sound of something structural shifting. The gravity of colonialism, it is not official policy. It is not deliberate in the way she describes. But the effect, she stopped. Restarted. We have a word. Velhari. The crack that appears when you name the weight. She paused. I have been saying it means that naming a weight causes structural damage. I think I have been using it to avoid the other meaning. What's the other meaning? Carla asked. The weight was already causing damage, Silverith said. The crack was already there. Naming it only makes it visible. The corridor held that silence for a while. Ubsymgi, Silverith said then, quietly to herself as if finding an anchor, which was not Velhari, which was not a language Carla recognized, but which had a quality in her voice that translated without translation. From now for me. From here forward. The specific grammar of a decision has not yet been spoken out loud, but it has already been made somewhere underneath language. Carla heard it. She said nothing. Some moments don't require a response. They only require a witness. On day 7, Sonnenvel finished the inverse frequency array. She had not slept. She had eaten what Yao brought her and nothing else. She had worked with the focused, consecrated intensity of someone doing a thing that they understood, not just technically but morally, to be important. She had rebuilt 7 relay nodes in the station's communication architecture, coordinated remotely with sympathetic relay engineers on 4 other stations across the Velhari network who had been quietly read in on the situation by Orith Den after the confrontation with Velhari, and engineered a broadcast solution that was, by any technical standard, extraordinary. June Park stood next to her when it was complete and looked at it with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, that acoustic, systemic listening kind of attention, and said, "It's beautiful." Sonnenvel looked at her. The communications engineer had the hollowed, incandescent expression of someone at the far end of exhaustion who has made something they're proud of. The inverse frequency will propagate through the network over the course of 6 days, she said. It won't reach every relay simultaneously. There will be a wave effect. Some communities will clear before others. That's okay, June said. Actually, that might be better. Why? Because if the doubt lifts everywhere at once, people won't know why, June said. They'll attribute it to coincidence or to something they did or to something chemical. If it lifts gradually, in a wave, the communities that cleared first will be ahead of the ones that haven't cleared yet. They'll have something to say to each other about what changed. She paused. The communication between them will do some of the work. Sannivel was quiet for a moment. You think about things differently than I do, she said. You think in systems, June said. So do I. My systems have more sound in them. Pause. Is that what you meant? Sannivel asked. When you said you were listening? When you listened to the relay? Yes, June said. Every system produces a frequency. Healthy systems have a specific quality to them, a kind of coherence. Damaged systems have dissonance. The modifier your relay was carrying, it introduced dissonance into the signal. Gradually, over years, the people receiving it internalized the dissonance as the normal sound of their world. She paused. When it clears, it's going to feel very strange to people. Like a sound they had stopped noticing, it has now ceased. Like the air has changed. She looked at Sannivel. I need you to help me prepare communications for the communities that will be receiving the broadcast. Something they can read or hear when the change happens. So they know what it is. So they're not afraid of it. What do I say? June considered. Tell them, she said, that something was in the signal that shouldn't have been. That it's gone now. That the confusion they may have been feeling about the people around them and the world around them was not theirs, it was introduced. And that's what they feel now. Going forward, they are closer to themselves. She paused. Tell them, Caro, starting now from this moment. Caro, the signal is clean. Caro, you can begin to trust what you hear. Sannivel wrote it down. She sent it to the relay engineers on the 4 other stations. At 0400 station time, on the 7th day since Unit 7 had arrived at Miravel 9, the broadcast began. It was not visible. It made no sound that could be heard. It remained silent and did not proclaim a victory or signal a turning point in the language of drama and declaration. It was simply a frequency moving through the network, quiet, clean, and patient, passing through 14 worlds like a hand smoothing something that had been crumpled for a long time. In the communication center, June Park sat next to Sannivel and listened. Not anything a human ear could hear. To the coherence returning. To the dissonance leaving. To the sound of a system beginning, slowly, cautiously, in the specific tentative way of things that have forgotten what health felt like, to sound like itself again. This is the part that the historians got wrong later. The official records, the ones that entered the Coalition archives and the Velhari historical texts and the Earth Coalition mission reports, described what happened next in terms of strategic outcomes and diplomatic resolutions. The Kethvar's operational infrastructure in Velhari space was identified and systematically dismantled over the following 8 months. The 4 colony worlds began stabilization processes. Vetsaran's case opened a conversation within the Empire, painful, contested, not quickly resolved, about the gravity of the colonialism charge and what the Velhari owed to the civilizations in their sphere. Earth and the Velhari Empire formalized a relationship that was not an alliance exactly and not an alliance equivalent. Something without a clean name, which the diplomats worked on naming for 2 years before giving up and simply calling it what it functionally was. The arrangement. All of that happened. All of that mattered. But it was not the thing that the Velhari stood in disbelief of. The event that left the Velhari in disbelief occurred on Day 8, the day before Unit 7's departure, in the station's main assembly hall. There was no ceremony planned. No formal proceedings, no diplomatic ritual, no official marking of what Unit 7 had done. Carla had been clear about that. They had come to work, they had worked, and they were going. The Velhari tendency to formalize everything was, in this instance, something to be gently declined because formalization would turn the experience into a monument, and monuments are for things that are over, and this was not over. The moment was a beginning, which is a different shape entirely. But the station's residents, the cleaning staff, cafeteria workers, junior analysts, the security officer who had not filed a 4th transfer request, the facilities manager who had answered Dorian's question about what the place felt like, and Reith, who had stopped filing reports altogether and had simply been present at Marcus's workstation because he did not know how to be anywhere else, had gathered informally in the assembly hall. Not to give speeches. Not to present medals. Just to be in the same space as the people who had been in their space for 8 days and had, without announcement, without drama, without the performance of heroism that the Velhari historical tradition would have recognized and categorized and archived, simply changed something. Unit 7 walked in and found approximately 200 Velhari residents standing in quiet assembly, and the quality of the quiet was not the quiet of ceremony. It was the quiet of people who had something to say and had not yet found the shape of it. Silverith stood at the front of the gathering. She had not planned a speech. She had prepared one and then looked at it that morning and set it down, because the words she had prepared were the words for a monument, and she had just finished thinking for the first time clearly about the difference. She said instead something simple. She said, "We did not know what we were asking for when we sent the requisition. We expected soldiers, strategy and force applied against force. We expected to receive something we could categorize and deploy and point at outcomes and say, this is what fixed it." She looked at the 5 members of Unit 7 standing at the entrance to the assembly hall, Carla still, Dorian with a cup of Velhari beverage he had somehow acquired en route, Marcus with his device, June listening to the room's acoustics, and Yael simply present in the way that Yael was always present, which was like a landmark present, like something that had always been there and by being there made the geography around it legible. Instead, Silvereth said, "We received people who paid attention." The hall was quiet. "We do not have a word for what that is," she said. "For people who can walk into the damage of a civilization and find, not the structural failures, not the enemy's hand, not the visible symptoms, but the shape of the wound beneath the symptoms. Who understands that some things can't be fixed by being attacked. Some damage can only be addressed by first understanding it clearly enough to see that it was never the whole story." She paused. "We stand in disbelief," she said, "not because you are extraordinary, but because you showed us that we were not as broken as we had come to believe. That beneath the damage, beneath 11,000 years of accumulated assumption and the last 7 years of systematic poisoning of our ability to trust what we saw, we were still, in the places that mattered, ourselves." The assembly hall was silent. Then it was not. The sound the Velhari made was not applause, it was a sustained resonant hum that built from individual voices into something that filled the space the way music fills a space, not by being loud but by being present, by occupying the room completely and evenly like warm light. Carla Voss stood in the entrance to the hall and let it happen around her. She was not a person who was easily moved. This was not callousness. It was the specific quality of someone who has experienced enough that they have learned to hold experience without being overwhelmed by it, to receive it fully as it is, without needing to perform a response to it. She was moved anyway. Quietly and privately, like a river moving beneath a calm surface. Dorian Cass was crying, which surprised no one who knew him. To everyone's surprise, Marcus Dale had put his gadget away. June Park had her eyes closed, listening to the frequency of 200 Velhari voices creating something coherent and whole out of individual sound, and her expression was the specific expression of someone hearing proof of something they had theorized and hoped for and had not been entirely certain was real. Yael Brennan stood in the middle of it and felt, with the clear, unhurried certainty that was her most consistent characteristic, that what was happening in this room was not an ending. It was a starting point. Caro, she thought. From here. ABSYMJHY. From now on, for me, we begin. Before the transport departed, Silvereth found Carla alone in the docking bay, doing a final equipment check with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has a long journey ahead and wants to start it with everything in order. "I want to ask you something," Silvereth said. "Ask." "The Earth Coalition, when they assembled Unit 7, when they sent you, did they know? Did they understand what the Kethvar's method was and select you specifically because you are the kind of person who could address it?" Carla considered the question for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "The Earth Coalition doesn't always know why it does what it does, any more than any large organization knows why it works when it works. The people who put Unit 7 together probably had some version of the reasoning. Probably not the whole version. Then how?" "We were available," Carla said. "We were available, and the problem was there, and someone somewhere in Earth's bureaucracy was smart enough to look at the seal of absolute necessity and think, this is not a problem for generals." She paused. "A lot of what works like that. Not because someone designed it perfectly. Because someone had the right amount of humility about what a situation was asking for." Silvereth looked at her. "You were not what we expected," she said. "Any of you." "I know," Carla said. "You are, I have been trying to find the Velhari classification for what Unit 7 is. For 11,000 years of taxonomy and organizational theory and I cannot find." "Don't look for one," Carla said. Not unkindly. "The hardest things to classify are usually those that do not fit within the problems they solve. Which is frequently why they can solve them." Silvereth was quiet for a moment. "Will you come back?" she asked. "If we need." "Send the requisition," Carla said. "We'll see what we can do." She finished the equipment check, picked up her bag, turned toward the transport. "Ambassador," she said without turning back around. "Yes." "The gravity of the colonialism question, the one Vethsaran raised. Don't let it become a monument either. Don't let the Empire resolve it in one big reckoning and file it away. Let it stay alive. Let it be a thing you're still working on. She paused. The civilizations in your sphere, they'll notice. Not the formal policy change. They're working on it. They're still asking. That's what changes how they see you. A long pause. That is, Silverith said softly, the most difficult thing you have said to me. I know, Carla said. She walked through the airlock. The transport departed. Station Miravel 9 held its position in the star field as it had for decades, as it would for decades more. A crossroads of diplomatic corridors, a place where important things happened, a place that had recently and without ceremony remembered how to be itself. In the communications center, the broadcast continued. On 14 worlds in the relay network, the signal moved, clean, clear, patient, through the infrastructure of a civilization that was, carefully and imperfectly and without guarantee of outcome but with the specific quality of deliberateness that is what intention looks like when it's real, beginning to remember the difference between the weight it carried and the crack that had been there underneath it all along. Carol. From here. The stars did not care, of course. Stars never do. But the people under them, Velhari and human and every species caught in the slow gravity of choices made by civilizations larger than themselves, the people under them were, in the tentative, necessary, deeply human, and deeply not human way of all things that choose to continue, still asking. I'm still listening. Still paying attention. This ultimately marks the start of everything.